Good afternoon, everybody. I am thrilled to welcome you to the first edition of the SCS DEI seminar series. This series is an important and actually overdue step in our DEI efforts. Specifically, as we develop DEI as a key priority, we need to learn and we need to debate and exchange ideas. So this seminar series is going to provide a platform for the entire SCS community, so we can all learn together from visionaries, learn from thought leaders in DEI in general and in academia and CS in particular, but also reach out and learn from the broader community. I look forward to wonderful programming in the months to come. I would like to recognize the committee that did the hard work for setting this up. Brad Myers, Rachel Burson, Judith Choi, Melissa Martinez, Brian Parno, and Ashley Patton. Ashley will moderate the discussion for this first edition. Incidentally, please send the committee any suggestions, comments, so that we can continue to make the lecture series as effective for SCS as possible. Well, speaking of visionaries and thought leaders, certainly our first speaker is setting the tone for this seminar series. Kelauni Jasmyn is the founder and executive director of Black Tech Nation, a national and international network of over 1,200 Black technologists, innovators, entrepreneurs, and allies, looking to change the color of tech. She is also the founder and CEO of Olivia, a Black tech talent and recruiting agency, which serves as a sister recruiting company to the global Black Tech Nation network. And lastly, she is co-founder and one of 3 general partners at Black Tech Nation Venture, a $50 million fund to support Black entrepreneurs and startups led by Black executives and people from diverse backgrounds. Kelauni is a native from Chicago and a summa cum laude graduate of Howard University with a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Chemistry. She currently serves publicly as the Vice Chair of the Policy and Entrepreneurship Committee of IEEE USA, the largest tech organization in the world. Please join me in welcoming Kelauni.
Virtual claps. Thank you so much for that great introduction, Marshall. And thank you so much to Carnegie Mellon School of Computer Science for inviting me today. I want to start off by actually apologizing. I'm in the tech world, I'm a techie myself, but as we all know, in this world of COVID, anything is possible when it comes to digital events and broadcasting. And so I'm having a little bit of trouble with the lag. So I want you to concentrate more on what I say today and less on the lag that you may see. So with that, I will go ahead and get started. So I want to start first by saying that, actually, I'll go back to my beginning slide if it'll let me. It might not. Okay, well, I want to start by saying doing this, being the first person for this series, is an honor, but it's also not surprising, actually. I have a history with the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But I'm very happy that you all are doing this work. You know, it will take a lot of purposeful effort to see more diversity and inclusion in all areas of technology, from kindergarten and tech education in the lower grades, all the way up through institutional education, such as in CMU, all the way up through venture capital and how money is given to ideas. We just have a long way to go when it comes to dismantling a lot of the inequities that we see. And that's why we're doing this work together. So again, I applaud the School of Computer Science, who has been, very instrumental in how I've gotten started, which I can't wait to talk about right now. So just a little bit about who I am. You know, I am first a Black woman, because that is the lens in which I see the world and the lens in which I'm going to give this talk today. I'm a software developer. I am an advocate for Black tech. I'm a businesswoman. I'm an entrepreneur and a startup investor. I'm an educator, I'm a community builder, and most importantly, I'm a system shifter. And what I mean by that is it is extremely important to me in the work that I do, and a lot of which you'll see in my presentation today, to shift how we as society members, as citizens, as educators, as family members, as, you know, everyone giving their I guess, value to the society in which we live. I want to make sure that I'm educating people as much as possible on how we can work together to shift the systems that we often see as, unfortunately, a problem when it comes to true diversity and equity. Now, today is actually a very special day, and again, why I'm extremely honored to be your very first speaker for this series. And that's because you'll see here, this is actually me from 4 years ago today. So April 1st, 2017, I held an event called Where is Black Tech in Pittsburgh? This was right after I had become a software developer, going through a 3-month boot camp to learn how to code. So I don't have a traditional educational experience, or a traditional degree, I should say, in the tech space. I went through a boot camp, I became a software developer, and I noticed very quickly that I wasn't seeing people in the Pittsburgh area taking advantage of all the amazing technology and the tech opportunities here in the city, especially, you know, in and amongst the Black community. And I am not a native Pittsburgher, as Marshall indicated in my bio. I'm actually from Chicago. So when I moved here to be a part of the amazing tech that was going on here and wasn't seeing people who looked like me, I had an event again today, 4 years ago, and Carnegie Mellon School of Computer Science, thanks to Ashley Patton, who is on this call right now, was my very first sponsor. So you can see how this is a full circle moment for me to be able to be the first speaker at your first DEI series, and then you all were my first sponsor at my very first event to start what I do now 4 years later. And just a little bit about this event to kind of frame myself and frame the story for you. Once again, it was held April 1st, 2017, and I managed somehow as a newbie in tech, I was very new to Pittsburgh, gather this huge room of leaders and institutions like CMU and government officials, people who ran organizations and community organizers. I got Black entrepreneurs and Black technologists, and we all gathered around for a day of conversation around very intentional topics, much like what I'm going to talk about today in this presentation. And some of those topics included things like, why is there a lack of Black technologists in the tech scene here in Pittsburgh? We talked about community building. Who's doing the work to make sure that Pittsburgh and the tech industry here is becoming a contributor to the communities in which it surrounds, or in which it is placed. We talked about higher education. Again, CMU, I would say, is a pinnacle in Pittsburgh as far as education goes. And for Pittsburgh as a city, just the amount of talent that the school brings by itself, and the recognition, the global recognition of CMU, talking about how do institutions like CMU make sure that the communities in which it surrounds is being included in all the great things going on. Structural racism, we talked about the different institutions in the city, such as the government, again, education, what policies are being made. We talked about the youth and like PPS, Pittsburgh's public schools, high school, young folks. Where are they in this conversation of tech? We definitely discussed the lack of resources, which is vast when it comes to how the Black community is under-resourced, disinvested, and really marginalized and kind of ignored when it comes to tech education specifically. And then last but not least, just the disconnect between the tech community and the Black community. And so for me, it was very important to stand in that gap and figure out, how do I bring these two communities who now I belong to as a Black woman and as a now techie, you know, software, full stack software developer. I wanted to figure out, how do I bridge these two together? And so from that came my organization, Black Tech Nation. And it really started very small. Ashley can tell you, when she gave me my first little amount of money to kind of get that event started and has continued to support Black Tech Nation. She knows how small this started at first. And now we're, you know, this international organization of Black techies. And I really just wanted to create a space where people of the Black culture could see other people who looked like them, be amongst people who look like them, and share resources, access, education, and things of that nature. And that's what I've done. And I've definitely wanted to make sure that this was a platform that benefited all of the institutions and organizations, people and entrepreneurs who wanted to see more involvement of the Black community in all the great things going on in the city. So our mission at the end of the day is to create a digital family of Black tech unicorns, Black technologists, professionals, entrepreneurs, and innovators, educators, and enthusiasts who work in tandem to influence and build the Black community through technology and innovation. So we call ourselves like a digital Wakanda for all of our Black Panther fans, which I'll talk about in a bit. And of course, you know, my shirt actually, it's in CSS, says Black Lives Matter. And, you know, we are in a very, we're in a heavy moment right now with social justice across the board. And we have to remember that not only do Black lives matter, but the involvement of Black innovation and Black people and voices in all areas is very important. And so that's what my call and my duty is as the leader of Black Tech Nation. So we actually have 700, like I said, Black techies all over the country and the world, and 1,200 total with our allies, such as CMU and other great people who may not be of, you know, the Black diaspora, but who are a part of Black Tech Nation to make sure that this becomes, you know, an ecosystem in which Black technologists can thrive. Essentially, a community, a partnership, and a resource that creates this, like I said, digital Wakanda. And my hope is honestly, you know, taking what I've been able to create and really fill in the various gaps that we see when it comes to why you don't see that many Black people in the tech industry. And I found there to be many, many gaps, right? All the way from education to funding to recruitment. And so I've kind of created this umbrella where we hit all of those gaps. And that's my own personal mission in a sense. So again, like Marshall kind of said earlier, is, you know, we created Black Tech Nation, this community, but then we have a media network because we want to publicly educate not just the Black community, but everyone to see that there are Black innovators and technologists who have great ideas and who are doing amazing, amazing work in the tech space that sometimes we just don't get to see. And so we got a big grant to do a public-facing media network to really highlight and uplift the voices and the profiles of these, what we call Black tech unicorns. I also have Olivia Wayne, which we recruit for companies who are looking specifically for Black tech talent. And having now started, we just got featured in TechCrunch and now this week in Bloomberg for our Black Tech Nation Ventures to, again, be a part of filling in the gap in that pipeline for Black entrepreneurs when it comes to capital. And we all know CMU has had amazing spin-outs come out of the School of Computer Science specifically. You're a world leader in robotics and AI and all kinds of things and have had many successful companies. Well, we want to see more companies that come from Black-led leaders who can also see the benefits of creating the technology of the future. And so that's what our fund, and you can go to btn.vc to see more about our fund, but that's what we're hoping to do, is put more dollars into Black ideas. And then lastly, policy is very important. And I'm going to talk about why policy is so important, especially as we all do this work around DEI within educational systems. So just really quickly, my personal mission, I came from a very rough neighborhood right outside of Chicago, an extremely economically depressed area. However, I was very lucky and even privileged as a Black person. I had two great, amazing parents. I grew up in a very stable home, and they supported me in this journey into the tech industry. This picture is actually when I was in the coding bootcamp 5 years ago. I had no idea what tech was. Tech was not something that was part of my education growing up. And that's the story for many Black kids, and I'm going to go into the reasons why. But we didn't get exposed to those kind of things. Never had exposure to the opportunities in tech until I joined this boot camp and I learned to code. And so now I feel a mission to give back to my community, and I have a mission to work with institutions like CMU to make sure that we're seeing more stories where someone can go, like myself, from being a substitute teacher making like very little money to making 6 figures in my very first job. That is what creates generational wealth for a people who in American society have been denied generational wealth for so very, very, very long. And we're going to get into that as well. And what I ultimately hope that, through the work that I do, and then also through the work I do, again, with institutions like CMU, is that we make sure, because tech it is moving so fast, it is so easy to develop people out of the future, if that makes any sense. Because if we stick with our same practices, policies, and institutional ways of doing things, technology will force us to automate not only people out of opportunities, but specific people out of opportunities, because a lot of things are being built on the very biased and, quite frankly, racist practices that we've already had. And so I want to make sure in my work that I influence people to make sure to stay cognizant of that fact so that we don't repeat the same mistakes as technology continuously becomes our future. So I'm going to start very blatant right now. I would assume you all are doing this series because you want to make real change. And with real change comes real honesty. And so I want to get into the very crux of how institutions like the higher education institution perpetuate things that we don't even realize we're perpetuating when it comes to systematic biases and racism, and why we don't see more diverse students within institutions. And so, universities are a part of the system, which I'm going to define, and the system is actually racist. And we're going to go over how that is, and then go over solutions to how to dismantle that, all of us individually in our work. Because no one person is responsible, but we are responsible individually in our roles to make sure that we dismantle it. And so we'll go into that right now. Now, you can't build programs around diversity and inclusion, ignore why they need to exist in the first place. So, let's use the School of Computer Science. You all are putting on this program. You're having the conversations, obviously. You want to do the work. But let's go to why this work has to be done in the first place. You can't just do diversity and inclusion, stick a Band-Aid on something, paint dirty nails. You have to actually clean the nails and then, paint them pretty colors. It's the same with doing this work. You can't do D&I or diversity and inclusion efforts if you don't take it upon yourselves to understand the structural reasons why you need them in the first place. So let's define what systemic racism is. What it is policies, rules, practices, etc., that have become a usual part of the way an organization or society works. And that results in and supports a continued unfair advantage to some people and unfair or harmful treatment to others based on race. So what I wanted to do, I'm going to have Ashley actually allow us to watch a video. This video came out when the whole George Floyd situation happened last year. And I think is a very good explanation of what systemic racism is, because I'm going to tie it into our efforts around D&I and how we can create solutions within institutions like CMU to dismantle a lot of these problems. So Ashley, I'm going to stop sharing and I'll let you share now.
Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire Black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny Black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, Black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with Black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the Black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
Thank you for sharing that, Ashley. I'm going to go back and share my screen. Okay, so I wanted to give that little history because I think it's important, even when we talk about diversity and inclusion within our institutions, our workplaces, and everywhere else. And so again, just a quick definition, because institutionalized racism comes from systemic racism, and it sees itself in our institutions in the same way with rules and practices that, you know, become a normal, usual part of an organization. And it perpetuates unfair advantage to some people and unfair, harmful treatment to others. And as we know, America is built of institutions where systemic racism quietly lives. So in healthcare, in government, in the food industry, justice system, corporate, banking, and of course, what we're talking about today in education. And I think that video kind of showed how all of these institutions work together to disenfranchise not just Black folks, but it just depends on the group. Everyone is affected in different ways, but by far Black people are probably the most marginalized for those reasons. So let's just talk really quickly about the education in the Black community. And again, I'm going to wrap this all around to CMU specific D&I efforts, hopefully moving forward. So unfortunately, throughout history, you know, education built us out of opportunity. And so I think we just have to recognize that first and foremost. Now, do I believe that Andrew Carnegie, who obviously has done amazing work, do I think that, you know, he set out to have a racist institution? Absolutely not. I don't think anyone even today is purposefully doing things to not be inclusive, but you have to realize that in 1900, there were many things in place that wouldn't allow these people to go to his school necessarily because of things like Jim Crow laws, segregation, terrible educational opportunities before college, very few housing opportunities. All of these things matter. And it's very difficult, even if, you know, this is in 1900, this is only, you know, 121 years ago, that's only 2 generations. And so when we talk about Carnegie Mellon, you know, that's not a long time to make a huge structural change. And so I tell people, be patient with yourself, because doing this work isn't going to be easy, because institutions are really big and heavy and have a lot of tradition that a lot of times we don't even realize. And so as you all do this work, keep in mind that this didn't happen overnight. It won't be fixed overnight, but it has to be intentional. And you have to understand the history, that there were many things stacked against diverse people during this time when the great institution of Carnegie Mellon and all these other institutions were created. Other contributions to, you know, what we see in institutionalized racism, specifically in higher education, is what I want to touch on now. So, you know, I've heard everywhere, you know, Carnegie Mellon is a great school, which it absolutely is. And when we define great for any institution or anywhere, when we think great, what automatically comes to mind? How do we define it? Who gets to decide what great means? And when we define great and we see what great looks like, does it ever look like someone who isn't the status quo, or maybe who traditionally has more opportunity? Typically it's not. And so we have to remember that we've been conditioned to believe to what great looks like. If we think about low performance expectations of people of diverse backgrounds, typically there are stereotypes that if you're white or Asian, you just are better at tech, you know, you're better at math, you're better at things. That's not always true. If we look at history, the reasons that may be true is because of specific structural reasons that denied certain people the ability to have the education to be just as great. And so you can't expect that because someone doesn't fit these molds that they're not going to be good enough to be a part of an institution. A lot of times we have location-based recruiting where organizations, institutions recruit from the same places because of what their definition of great is. How we measure people, we tend to recruit from the same areas, same type of schools, same type of people. And so that also contributes to a lot of the things that we see where it comes to lack of diversity in higher education. A lot of times as well, there's inadequate support and guidance for the diverse communities within an institution. So you might have a few, I'm just going to say Black students, but it could be students of any marginalized background who don't have the support systems within an institution to really thrive. I think the retention rates in the first year of college for Black students far outweighs, the lack of retention. So after 1 year, you typically see way more Black students leaving from predominantly white institutions than, of course, white students, because there isn't proper or adequate guidance within the institution to make the students feel comfortable or feel that they can succeed. And they also feel typically a lot more pressure because of the stereotypes that they maybe shouldn't be there because of their race or background. So they end up becoming way more stressed and more fatigued because they're trying to prove that they belong there. And these are things that we don't think about, the stress on someone who might be the only one in their company or their institution. We have to keep in mind that they have to have a support system around them. The other thing that I see as, a lot of places do this is hiring a DEI person or officer as a Band-Aid, and not willing to make the actual structural changes. And like I said, institutions are big, they're heavy, they take a long time to change, but there has to be a willingness to do that work. And a DEI officer can only do so much when it comes to structural change that will really increase diversity within institutions. And so while DEI officers are great, they can help to give great ideas and put on great programs, what we're trying to dismantle takes way more than that. There's also sometimes an unwillingness to place responsibility on the right departments and people. So in big companies and institutions, a lot of times you have multiple departments and there's a pointing of the fingers. Well, you guys have to do this, or that's not our responsibility, or that can't come from our funding or our budget, because, it's no one's individual fault. However, there has to be some level of responsibility put on everybody in every department. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. There's also this idea of a fear of sharing power. In order to see change, we have to share power. And as we know, historically, power sits in the hands of specific people. Well, there has to be an active willingness to hire more faculty of color, to hire more professors, more chairs on boards, people of color and Black people. And that means relinquishing power. Now, you individually have to grapple with if that's something that you are willing to do, because it has to happen for society to become an equitable place for everyone. And last but not least, there's a perpetuation of gentrification that actually higher institutions do. They support the perpetuation of gentrification. So using, Pittsburgh as an example, a lot of tech companies come to Pittsburgh because of CMU. Because of the School of Computer Science, because you have amazing, talented students graduating every single year. And so tech companies want to be a part of being able to take advantage of those students being here and take advantage of the amazing tech, space that has been created because of CMU's presence. However, because of that, you end up driving up prices in communities surrounding the school, because the tech companies come in, drive up prices that often disproportionately impacts Black people and people of color who can't afford the property taxes anymore because of structural racism and lack of wealth, because of the fact that there weren't homes that were given to our grandparents and great-grandparents. And so the system continues. So what is the responsibility of institutions, of CMUs, of tech companies to make sure that as you come to take advantage of the tech talent, that you're not pushing people out at the same time? And that is what's happening. So we have to figure out in this work, how do we support communities in dismantling that kind of issue? So how do we dismantle institutions? Well, we have to do it piece by piece. So institutions, we say that, there's, in the video, they said, there's no individual person that's responsible for all of this. But I actually kind of disagree. We all are pieces to a whole. Institutions are not these big things that have legs and walk and make their own decisions. It's a bunch of different people like you and I who make up these institutions. And and in our daily decisions cause our daily actions. Our daily actions then create the daily rules of our environment. The daily rules then create the daily culture, and the daily culture creates the regulations, how we invest, who we hire, and that ultimately creates a daily acceptance. So I would challenge CMU, School of Computer Science, as you do this work, what are the daily decisions being made by every single person that create these gaps that we see in our systems, in our organizations, and in our institutions that continue to allow for lack of diversity. I wanted to use a quick example of this by using cars, actually. So I just Googled this today, and all of these car recalls came up. And I guess this happens every week. They post like which cars are being recalled. And so why do cars get recalled? Cars are recalled because there's a little piece or a little part of the car that is deemed dangerous. It's deemed that, it could cause death or serious injury if something were to go wrong. So car companies are willing to take back thousands and thousands of cars just to make sure that people are safe, because the system that they built in the car malfunction. It has the possibility to malfunction, and they don't want to take that chance. That is no different than what we see in our systems in which we operate every day. There are, like this slide before, little gaps here that we ignore, and as if they aren't literally affecting the lives of people who those gaps actually can harm, in the system. And that includes Black people and people of color who fall victim to these gaps, much like the people who could possibly fall victim to the cars. And so we can't be quote unquote dummies about it to car dummies, that is, to how thinking that just because one little piece in the system is broken, that, oh, well, that's okay, we'll ignore it. Or the piece that I'm responsible for in building the system, well, I can ignore that because it's not really my responsibility. No, we all have a piece to the puzzle of the system in which we live and create. And so we have to fix what is broken, especially in the education system. And my question is, as I go through this presentation and I give solutions for how we can do this work together, what piece do you play, and what are you willing to do to move your piece in the right way so that we can create a system that benefits all of us and that we all want to see? Because ultimately, we are all responsible. Now, before we think about how our piece, how we all contribute and what our piece is and what it looks like, what we don't want to happen is this. And as you can see, I'm using a little Tetris theme here. So this is the first Tetris theme where we created the gaps in the system. Then there's a second Tetris theme where I just like Tetris. So there's a second Tetris theme of like, we're each a piece. But then like, as we're each moving to create this new system and do this diversity and inclusion work, like we don't want to just throw our pieces around, because that can actually be a lot more damaging, especially as we talk about the tech industry, because tech moves so fast. This is what I was alluding to earlier. You all are literally responsible for the world's tech. I'm going to go ahead and say Carnegie Mellon University is the pinnacle of tech of the world, I would say. And so it is a great responsibility, specifically on the School of Computer Science, on how systems are built as we do this work to be more inclusive, because technology has the great potential to move so fast that we can't be intentional. And we end up, like I said earlier, building certain groups out of the future. And we don't want that to happen. Another thing is that diversity and inclusion programs, they can actually cause this mess. You know, companies and organizations think they're doing the right thing by creating these diversity and inclusion programs, but they're not intentional. They don't talk to the community. They don't think about all of the ways in which they perpetuate these issues, and they just throw solutions, and it doesn't work for anyone. And like I said, becomes harmful. So as you all continue to do this work, really talk to the community and figure out what's best needed and what CMU can do to not only internally, but externally increase diversity and inclusion efforts. And I just want to say really quickly, just as an example of like a diversity and inclusion program that wasn't really thought out, that we actually see all day, every day in our society, which is actually affirmative action. So affirmative action is a very kind of contentious topic because some people feel that it's not fair that affirmative action was created for Black people for companies and institutions to have to reach certain numbers of Black people because of, you know, the inequities that we see in the system in our society. So some people feel like that's not fair. But the funny part is that was built for Black people to kind of have an opportunity like everyone else because of the systematic racism that was built against the community. However, do you know which group benefits the most in our society from affirmative action? It's actually white women. White women benefit the absolute most from affirmative action, which just shows that now, don't get me wrong, white women absolutely have their own hurdles to jump past for sure, especially I can relate as a woman. However, that program, affirmative action nationally, was not meant to benefit that particular demographic. So that's kind of an example of like, if you aren't intentional of thinking through D&I programs, it won't be fruitful in the end. So championing change, let's talk about solutions because I don't want to, you know, only talk about the bad. I mean, we all have gone through 2020. It's been a rough year for all of us. I'm sure it's been a rough year for all of you who, you know, come to digital school every day to teach the students at Carnegie Mellon, having to switch your entire university to fit the virtual times we're in could not have been easy. We've all gone through it this past year. And then particularly as a Black woman, as a Black community member, and for the people on this call who are allies to Black issues, we saw what happened last year with George Floyd. And as the trial goes on right now, I think we all realize that there are big issues that we all need to find some way to tackle. And so I want to make sure that as I talk about the history of why we're even having this conversation, I also give you solutions, because there's nothing worse than a bunch of people who complain and don't give solutions. So that's what we're going to do right now. How can CMU champion change? Oh, I forgot I had the little animation there. Okay. So there are 3 areas that I'm going to discuss for how I think, as you all continue to do this work, what you should be thinking about as it pertains to your D&I efforts. And I'm going to frame it obviously in the context of the Black community. So you can be a champion for the Black community through inviting the community to you. So everyone knows who CMU is in Pittsburgh. How often does a kid from Homewood, or I know you guys have programs, but does like the average person from a disadvantaged area get to come to the school and just be in the class or be able to see what you all create, all the robots and things you create at the School of Computer Science? Is that something that's being done intentionally all the time? That's important because people have to see that CMU is willing to be a part of the community in which they reside. Making sure that you host Black-centered and Black-led events. I am so grateful again to how the School of Computer Science has supported my work, particularly because of Ashley Patton's advocacy for Black Tech Nation. So in 2018, I was able to do quite a few events at your school. I enjoyed every single event we did, and we had so many Black people who came to me and said, how did you get CMU to like let you do events in their School of Computer Science? Like, how did that happen? And that just shows you that there is a disconnect because they couldn't believe that CMU allowed me to do that. But I, on the other hand, was like, oh, they've been nothing but great to me. So there is obviously opportunity to continue to do this work together so that we change people's minds. The other thing you can do is sponsor community events related to Black culture. Black people, we love block parties. People of diverse background love get-togethers and community events. Carnegie Mellon should be at every single event, even if it's just one representative or one student or a table or something. You should be in the room at those events because it shows people that while I may not, qualify yet to be a student at CMU, I understand that they want me there, you know, in some way, maybe in the future, or they want to see more diversity in their school, that messaging goes a long way. It's important to partner with schools, districts, community organizations, and nonprofits very loudly and unapologetically in order to support diverse communities. So you can't do things very shyly or very small. You have to be very loud about your support around your diversity efforts, because then people won't know if you don't. And like, for example, this series that we're doing today that I'm keynoting, you know, how many people were invited from outside the community? How many Black people, Latinx people are on this call right now? How many people from the LGBTQ community are on this call? Like, how do we make sure communities are a part of these conversations with the leaders of institutions, you know, like Marshall and like Brad and Kevin and Ashley? Like, to have this access is very important. And I'm going to wrap up here because I know we want to do questions. Giving money to organizations to support educational parity, making sure that schools like Pittsburgh Public Schools are seeing your involvement. And I think that's something you all are already doing, so that's good, but we want to do more. More is always the best. The next thing you can champion is Black students in education. It would be a great thing to require one semester of a computer science student to mentor a Black youth or a youth of a diverse background, to do a big academy. I know at my school at Howard University, they had an academy for young folks right on the campus with us. So these little Black kids were seeing, you know, us as college students every single day, and they knew one day they could be like us. That is very important. So there should be a very intentional program or academy or something right on CMU's campus to show the Black and diverse communities that, you know, we want to train you up to be able to come to our school. You should be showing all your robots anytime you can to anyone who is of a diverse background so they can see that exposure. You want to give opportunities for Black youth to intern at your spin out companies. You know, huge companies like Wombat Security, I believe, came from CMU. You all have great connections to alumni networks. Like, you can make it so Black youth, youth of diverse background, even adults who may not have gotten the chance when they were younger to intern or just be around these amazing spinouts that CMU has. And that's what I would love to see. And lastly, you can champion Black tech and innovation. So challenge what a good idea looks like in your mind. You know, when we think of a good idea, who do we picture? What does that idea look like? Ideas don't have a color. If it's a good idea, it's just a good idea, and there should be investment in it. So you should put money behind diverse ideas. You should mandate that CMU spinoffs launch with diversity scaling plans. So if you come out of CMU as a company, you have to have a diversity plan immediately for your hires and as you scale to become a bigger organization. You should scout Black talent the way that sports scouts sport Black talent. You have to go directly into communities, go to these schools, go to their entrepreneurial programs and their little tech programs, and find those kids that look the most promising and pull all your resources into those kids. That is how we get equity and get opportunities for all types of people. And last, you have amazing professors. They should be helping Black startups or startups of color with their entrepreneurial programs, even if it's just 1 hour of mentorship to develop a piece of AI for one of their products. Professors should lend at least 1 hour, you know, once a month to diverse people so that that knowledge is shared, you know, that knowledge that previously, because of structural issues, wasn't shared before. So we can have the same opportunities that everyone else has. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be honest, this will take money. It will take money and effort and intentionality and a sharing of power, a sharing of responsibility. CMU, I know, has quite a bit of alumni that give back, and some of that should be given to people to make sure we have more alumni one day of diverse backgrounds. And so money has to be given, and a structural overhaul has to happen. And lastly, because I know we might have some students on this call, I wanted to tell you what you can do to, in your D&I efforts, to champion diversity within your institution of CMU, is to hold your school's department and faculty responsible, to get involved with your communities off campus. There are plenty of programs and nonprofits that do this work of increasing education for all people, especially in the tech space, like Black Tech Nation. You can volunteer with us. You vow to build diverse teams when you go out and build your companies. Make sure you're building them with diverse teams from the very, very beginning. You guys are the professors of the future. You are the technologists of the future. You're the multi-million-dollar exiting companies of the future. You have to make sure that as you begin, you have to understand the system in which we live that has afforded you the opportunity to be successful is the same system that holds a lot of people back. And so there's a responsibility, a shared responsibility for you as in your educational privilege to give back to those that might not have it. And that could be with Black Tech Nation. And so I'm going to plug us really quickly. This picture down at the bottom is actually at the School of Computer Science. I forget which floor it's on, Ashley, when we did the event in 2018, but it was an amazing event. And I just wanted to shout that, highlight that picture because, again, I've had great events at Carnegie Mellon School of Computer Science. But basically, Black Tech Nation can be that place to for your Black students to feel like they have a space of people that look like them, a space for mentorship. We have a space for your students to see examples of Black tech excellence, to serve as a space to highlight the achievements of your Black students. And I know you don't have many, that's just the honest truth, but hopefully there's efforts being made to have more. And so as you gain more Black students and students of color, having Black Tech Nation as a space for them when they might feel alone in at Carnegie Mellon for right now, at least until diversity is built up, we can be that space for them and we can work with Carnegie Mellon to do that. Partner to help universities. We can partner to help you build these tech and entrepreneurial programs for disadvantaged youth, and ultimately to help CMU speak directly to the community about your efforts and your allyship in diversity and inclusion work. So we all have a part to play. I know that was a lot. I tried to go really quickly on a very big issue to give you context and to show you where all of us fit and how you absolutely have a piece in this work. And we all have a part to play. So let's now go do that work. Hopefully I've given many ideas on how you can do that. And I'm so grateful and happy to be partnered with CMU in so many ways. And thank you again for giving me this opportunity to share with you this afternoon.
So much, Kelauni. That was incredibly interesting and engaging and thoughtful and thought-provoking. At this point, I'd love to open the chat for Q&A. Feel free, if you have a question, to shoot me a note, and I'll go ahead and moderate that for Kelauni so that we're not flooding her too much all at once. So please let me know what we can ask her. But Kelauni, I guess for me, one of the immediate questions that I had listening to you talk, and I was like sitting here with my camera off clapping so many times, but one of the things that we often, I think, build when, and I'm saying this personally, right? I'm a white leader working on diversity projects. How do we avoid monoliths, right? Like not all white people are the same, not all Black people are the same, not all Black children have the same intersections or resources. What advice do you have about making sure that we're remembering that these are people and individuals in our work?
So that is a difficult thing that even I struggle with. So let me be transparent that no one has the answer to this work, to be honest. Like we don't have all the answers, and we can only rely on our own sometimes basic human instincts to do certain things that we can't even control, which is having biases, putting everyone in one category, monoliths. As humans, we look for the path of least resistance. So even in doing this work, we can be violent towards the work because we are doing these natural, almost archaic ways of thinking about this problem and about people, which Ashley, as you mentioned, is putting everyone in a group. So, all Black people need these three things. That's just not true. And we know that for all of our respective backgrounds. So what I would say is we have to talk to individuals to remember that individuals make up a whole. And the more that you go out and talk to people who do not look like you, go into communities that you may have heard certain stereotypes about. Being intentional in separating stories will automatically help you understand that I met one, I met one Mexican woman who had this story, and I met a Black, a Black person who's blind with this story, and I met a Muslim man who, pick something, like I met all these different people with different stories. It reminds me that I can't treat this as one big block of a group. So then what do you do? Because you also can't cater to every single story either. I would say you do what you can with what you have, because I would tell you, whatever you are doing intentionally and with the right education and with those right stories in mind, you can't really do wrong. It's always just moving forward one step in front of the other, and keeping in mind the people that you have interacted with in their stories and putting them first and putting their voices first. Because a lot of times they can tell you, okay, this is how you can best serve me right now. Don't do this, do this. And just opening that dialogue to people who don't look like you. But yeah, I don't have all the answers. So that's my best answer for that.
It was a really good answer, so thank you. So sometimes one of the kind of hidden aspects of white supremacy in culture is that we get really locked up in perfectionism. Do you have advice for us as we, especially those of us who identify as white on the webinar, who might just be learning about how to expose our own privilege and think about our roles in these systems? What advice do you have about avoiding perfection paralysis? That, it's not necessarily about getting it perfect. It's about trying and getting it closer to right than what we've done.
I'm going to say an answer that some of you may not like to hear, but it's the truth. And so I hope that's why we're on this call. And the truth is, you have to get really comfortable being uncomfortable. And this system has privileged certain people to be comfortable a lot. And in doing this work, this might be the first time you have to put yourself willingly in conversations around people and make mistakes that are going to be uncomfortable. And the reactions you get from people may not be what you want to hear. It may be awkward. You may go home and feel like, I just did that so wrong, but we're all learning. And this is just something that you have to, no child comes out of the womb walking, like they fall multiple times. And that is just the nature of changing entire systems that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're all over generations going to have to make mistakes. And so what I would tell my white allies who have not had to really ever think of this stuff, like it's not a part of your daily life because the system in which you live has never, has always been to your benefit. So it's literally like being like coming out of a dream and saying, oh my God, I've been part of this dream space that other people have not been a part of. And I can't believe that that I actually perpetuate this, not even knowing I did, that's uncomfortable, but you have to do the work and just know that you're going to make mistakes. It's not going to be perfect. I would even say as a Black person, I don't always do it perfectly. I even make mistakes on how to best support my own community. I make the same mistakes of perpetuating white supremacy in my Blackness because I grew up in the same structural system that you guys grew up in, which centered whiteness. And so, we all have to just keep that in mind and be gentle with ourselves. I'll say that.
Thank you for that. So we've got one kind of very specific question from the chat. A member of the audience who has worked really intentionally as a volunteer at a volunteer nonprofit who's done a variety of projects. Can you maybe highlight some of the ways that an organization that has been working on equity might partner with Black Tech Nation or other community organizations in Pittsburgh that you know of?
Sure. So I'll go with the first question of Black Tech Nation. It's a simple email, contact@blacktechnation.com. We honestly, I've been very fortunate. I don't think I could have started this in another city outside of Pittsburgh and have gotten the support that I've gotten had it not been for Pittsburgh, which is interesting to say because Pittsburgh has a long way to go when it comes to equity across the board. I don't know if you all saw the latest ACLU statistics for Black Pittsburghers, but the numbers are absolutely atrocious. But I will say that I personally have gotten a ton of support from institutions and companies to do this work. And so I'm always looking to figure out how do I, in an industry that is obviously the #1 industry in the world as tech, tech is everywhere, it's everything. How do I make sure I'm partnering with the right people in Pittsburgh to move Pittsburgh forward so that those numbers from ACLU can improve greatly because they are terrible. And I encourage all of you to look them up. They just, I think, came out yesterday, but yeah, so just contact@blacktechnation.com if you want to partner. As far as organizations in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh is very small, especially considering the amazing vast amount of resources here. It's such a small place. And the reason that I think it's such an advantageous place to do this work is because the degrees of separation to leaders who really can make a difference is so small. And I think, again, that's how Black Tech Nation was able to take off so quickly. I don't know if you all know this, but there are more nonprofits in Pittsburgh than there are per capita than there are in New York City. So they call us actually the Silicon Valley of nonprofits. That's just how many organizations are here doing work around pretty much any topic you can think of. So as far as partnering with in Pittsburgh, it's literally a Google away. And if whoever that person is, you want to email me, I have organizations specifically, I can't off the top of my head think, but I would love to know what you specifically want to do. And I'd be happy to give recommendations of amazing people I know who are doing amazing work in the city.
Thanks, Kelauni. We have a couple of live questions, so we'll go to David Witter for the next question.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelauni, for being here and giving up some of your time to prepare the talk and to help us think through these things. You mentioned earlier in your talk that CMU builds the best robots and builds the best AI, and we're very used to sort of being the best in a lot of things, and I'm privileged to be a student here for that reason. At the same time, I think we'd all acknowledge that we're probably not the best at D&I, and going from that place of being the best at a lot of things that we sort of do during our day job to transitioning to that place of humility that is needed to acknowledge that we have a lot of room to grow here is difficult. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for us so that we don't come at this from a ivory tower, we're going to save the world perspective, and can put that aside so that we can actually make real and lasting change that acknowledges the lived experience that does live outside the ivory tower.
Yeah. No, David, I don't. You're on your own, actually.
Oh, no.
No, I'm kidding. I can do the best I can because I'm not in that ivory tower. I'm affiliated, thanks to Ashley and Marshall and everyone at SCS has been very welcoming of my work, but my work is within the community. I think the work, and this is a lot of times, I think if we can have an honest conversation right now, is there's a thin line of like, when we talk about, let's just go white and Black, right? in society, you'll often hear white people go to Black people, what do I do? Like, I want to help, what do I do? And then Black people, you'll get some who say, okay, I can help you. And then you'll get some saying, this is not my responsibility to teach you how to dismantle what you created or what your community created. Like that, I don't know how to help you because I didn't create it. I'm just the casualty of it. So it's like, I can give you suggestions. I think I gave a lot of suggestions in my presentation for what I think CMU can do to help Black students, the Black community in our fight for equality and justice, what I think you can do related to education and Black innovation. That's all I got because I'm not in CMU. Only the people in CMU in leadership positions can really do the work, because it starts top and it goes down. As intentional as students might want to be, it still is on the leadership. And so I would, like I told in my presentation, stress to students to stress the leadership and tell them to figure out what they want to do and who they want to be as an institution. And you guys have to do the work together. That's as much as I have, because I don't know what policies or regulations and things that you have in place that perpetuate, the issues in D&I.
Thank you.
Thanks. We have another question from Victoria Dean.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi there. So I recognize that preparing a talk like yours takes time and effort. When SES asks people to do this work to help our relatively privileged community to learn and work through our own DEI issues, there's an additional burden we're placing on speakers like you. How can we correct for this?
That is a great question. So I'll start by saying this is the work I chose to do. I wasn't forced to do this work. No one made me do this work. I don't even really feel a sense of obligation to anyone to do this work except to my community. So this is in my heart to do this work. So luckily, I don't feel that any institution, or I speak in a lot of different places, I don't ever feel that I'm being burdened because this is what I signed up for. Now, where the issue comes in is when it is not a person who is mandated or has mandated themselves to do this work. So let's say within maybe the education system where the one Black person or one person of color has to answer for all people of color within a company or within an institution, answer all the questions, be on all the committees, that's where it becomes an issue, because that person can't be your scapegoat for your laziness, not you specifically, not anyone on this call specifically, but for the laziness of doing the work yourself, doing the education yourself, fixing yourself, your own biases. That person can't be given that burden because they're already burdened by the system that you're asking them about. So I will say this, SES did pay me, so I feel very, I don't feel used at all. Ashley has been very great in making sure that the work that I do is valued. And I will say, of the partners that I have, that SES has been pretty intentional. There's room to grow for sure, but I just want you students to know that I don't necessarily feel burdened by it, but I'm happy that that is something being thought about. And I'm actually going to think more about that question for future reference. That was a great question.
Thanks, Kelauni. We are actually over time by quite a bit, and I think a good response to Victoria's really excellent question about value and work is respecting that you agreed to an hour of your time, and we're a little bit over that now. So I want to make sure that we respect your time, the time of the audience members, and the other events that are happening after this one. I think Sig Bovec is following up. So thank you so much, Kelauni. For audience members, we'll have a recording of this talk available once it's been closed captioned. And you can't wait to get to work. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for all for coming.